Welcome to This Explainer. You know, there are languages born in courts, others in books, and others in total silence. But this one, well, it began in curiosity. Today, we're setting the stage for a really unique story. It's a fascinating journey into how human beings interact with linguistic history, not just to learn it, but to creatively reshape it.
Long before this project had an official name, it was really just a feeling. The kind of feeling that lingers when words from totally different worlds start to sound like they're trying to recognize each other. Picture a young mind, right? Moving through language lessons and online videos, absorbing fragments of global speech with absolute wonder. Hearing Pennsylvania Dutch on a screen, noticing how Afrikaans bends softly like wind over open land, how Dutch carries structure like old stone bridges, and how German holds weight like iron doors that still remember being opened. And somewhere between all of those observations, this massive question formed. What if these languages were never separate? Obviously not in actual literal history, but in imagination, in design, in pure possibility? That premise is our hook today. We're going to transition from that boundless, mythical feel of a young learner's imagination right into the rigorous, historical realities of how the Germanic language family actually splintered in the real world.
So let's dive into part 1, the Germanic family tree and the fractures in its foundation.
To truly understand the architecture of this constructed language we're looking at, we first have to look at the physics of real-world language evolution. Languages don't just split by magic, right? They fracture due to geography and time. Take the Benrath line, for example. This is a major linguistic boundary. Basically, between the 3rd and 9th centuries AD, this phenomenon called the High German consonant shift rippled through the southern parts of the West Germanic dialect continuum. It created this firm, physical and phonetic border right across Germany, effectively splitting the northern Low German dialects from the southern High German varieties.
And look at how this physical shift literally mutated the words. Up in the north, speakers kept the original hard K and P sounds, so they'd say machen for make and appel for apple. But down in the south, those hard stops shifted into softer fricatives and affricates. Machen became machen, and appel became affel. This natural fracturing of the language family tree laid the absolute groundwork for the distinct linguistic identities that would eventually inspire our modern creator.
Which brings us to part 2, diaspora, contact, and evolution.
Because you see, the story absolutely does not end with a line drawn across Europe. These languages evolved way further when their speakers packed up and migrated across the globe. Think about the real-world forces of linguistic evolution. Back in 1652, when Dutch settlers arrived in South Africa, their language didn't just stay static, stuck in a highly multilingual contact zone. It underwent intense blending and simplification, eventually giving birth to Afrikaans. Meanwhile, other diasporas were creating their own linguistic offshoots. Russian Mennonites carried Low Prussian dialects across the world to form Plauditsch, and German settlers in America heavily interacted with English to create Pennsylvania Dutch. Basically, languages morph when they touch.
And honestly, the resilience of those morphed languages and isolated communities is just wild. Look at this fascinating study on the bilingual speech rhythm of an Afrikaans community down in Patagonia, Argentina. Over a century ago, Afrikaans speakers settled there and eventually became dominated by the Spanish language. Yet researchers found that these bilinguals still strictly control vowel duration in their Afrikaans. They maintain a rhythm completely separate from their Spanish. It's a brilliant illustration of how deeply embedded a language's rules can remain, stabilizing and surviving against all odds.
All right, let's shift gears to part 3, crafting der Gemmeëntesch Täl.
So these historical realities, the shifting consonants, the diasporas, the Patagonian survival, they're incredibly fascinating on their own. But for our story, they acted as the blueprint for a brand new linguistic laboratory, der Gemmeëntesch Täl, also known as Nederhöchduitsch. Now, it's absolutely crucial to separate history from construction here. This is a modern, learner-developed conlang, a constructed language. It's a hybrid experimental system that deliberately fuses those historical Germanic evolution patterns we just talked about, just to see how they might interplay if intentionally combined today.
The motivation behind this whole thing was deeply personal and academic. I mean, imagine being in high school and developing this profound fascination with how languages simplify, merge, and evolve. By comparing Afrikaans, Dutch, Plauditsch, and German dialects, the creator wasn't just studying history. They were launching a creative research project to actively map the very DNA of Germanic languages.
Let's look at how that actually works in part 4, the architecture of blending.
Because building a functional communication system requires way more than just picking words at random, right? It requires a systematic architecture. Vocabulary for this hybrid was built from A to Z,
based on observed similarities across the Germanic spectrum. Grammar was heavily experimented with, especially looking at how pronouns and negations function. The creator actively implemented the simplification trends famously seen in Afrikaans and Pennsylvania Dutch, effectively stripping away unnecessary complexities, while simultaneously integrating dialect-style spelling variations to give the language its own cohesive, unique phonetic identity.
Now, I do need to impartially clarify the line between real historical evolution and symbolic linguistic inspiration. Der Gemmeëntesch Täl is not historically tied to real individuals as native speakers. Any historical figures, migrations, or time periods referenced in the context of this conlang are strictly inspirational context. They serve as the theoretical backdrop for the language's design, definitely not literal claims of historical fact.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Part 5, A Living Linguistic Laboratory.
So, what is the life cycle of an idea like this, and why does it actually matter? The symbolic growth of this conlang begins quietly in Phase 1, with that early exposure and academic interest we discussed. Phase 2 is the critical idea formation of a hybrid system. Phase 3 involves the rigorous structuring of Nederhöchduitsch, testing the vocabulary and grammar to make it recognizable as a cohesive system. And finally, Phase 4 is where it lives today, an ongoing shared community space for learning and development.
Ultimately, the project aims to actively explore linguistic blending and create an experimental communication system. Building a language helps us fundamentally understand the mechanics of how real languages breathe and grow. By constructing one, learners gain this intimate, hands-on knowledge of evolution, creating a shared space where language isn't just something you memorize from a textbook, but something you actually build.
Understanding language is really about understanding human connection and history. So think about your own linguistic roots for a second. What language would you create if you could blend the historical branches of your own heritage? Creative language construction empowers you to not just observe history, but to actively participate in the mechanics of human expression.
Projects like the Gemmeëntesch Täl remind us that the boundaries of language are only as rigid as we allow them to be. Through careful observation and creative passion, we can always imagine new ways to speak to one another. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring the words around you. After all, what dormant language is waiting to be uncovered by your own curiosity?